In the inquiries we did on homelessness and mental illness, it wasn't just human rights NGOs that were important. Many of the people who are actually doing the most effective and important work in the community to care for these groups of people were carer groups. And one of the things that is very important to do, whether we're lawyers or human rights activists or both, is not overlook the fact that the people who are doing very important human rights work in the community often don't see themselves as human rights defenders. They see themselves as just carers. So there are human rights issues going beyond the individual, and there are groups that we need to talk to who don't self-identify as human rights activists. They say, oh no, we're just a group of parents looking after the elderly or looking after, young people with disabilities. It's also very important, I think, not to underestimate or overlook the importance of discussing the terms of reference in advance with all of the stakeholders. Because if you don't incorporate their perspective, at least in the initial discussions, then the reality is that they won't feel ownership of the process of the inquiry, and they won't therefore necessarily participate as much as you would like.
We had a very extensive preparation that involved, amongst other things, focus groups with disabled people, so that we could hear from them in their own environments where they were comfortable to help identify the issues. And out of that process came the original consultation document. Once the preparation stage was done, we called for submissions in writing, but also orally, in person, over the phone. We tried to be as inclusive as we could, and particularly for disabled people, to identify what was the most appropriate way for them to participate. And again, I think one of the things that we learnt was that within limited resources, the more places we could actually go, the better, because it opened up the issues in those communities.
We started networking right from the very beginning. And in our country, there are so many NGOs. So we have been working very closely with them, holding seminars and talking to them, and that they should bring in the human rights aspect to their work. Because after all, human rights is part of life. It's not something coming from Mars or some places. It's with us, you see. So I'm rather pleased that in the past 5 years, we have got a lot of partners.
With our Indigenous community, with Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders, we found that in some cases they wanted to talk to us as a group, and we went right around the country. We held hearings in about 20 different towns and cities, and we would sometimes literally, I remember in some cases, sit down under a tree and talk to a group of 20 or 30 Aboriginal people about what was happening in their community. And that poses some challenges in terms of having an accurate record of the evidence. I mean, there are all sorts of things that you've got to think about in terms of having transcripts and ensuring that when you come to write the report, you're accurately reflecting the testimony or the evidence that people have given.
I find that many national inquiries have got into real difficulties when the scope has just expanded and expanded, and it becomes almost impossible then to actually conclude the inquiry within a reasonable period of time. And that's why I say having a very strong focus right at the beginning on what it is that is going to be examined, how it's going to be done, is very important to stop this inquiry drift.
It was basically an inquiry into accessible public transport for people with disabilities. Basically we looked at taxis, buses and trains. We stuck to land transport in the end. We did consider doing all kinds of transport because there had been certainly complaints, particularly about air transport, but in the end we decided not to do air transport or to do ferries, largely to keep it within kind of a manageable parameters.
Хяналтын ажлын зохион байгуулалт нэг төлөвлөлтийн хувьд гэвэл бид энэ бидний одоо комисс байгуулагдсан үеэс эхэлж бидний одоо хийсэн шалгалт, судалсан өргөдөл гомдол, тийм ээ, явуулсан сурчлагаа, сургалт маань бол энэ хяналтын ажлыг эхлэх одоо бэлтгэх тэр хөрс суурь нь бол болж байсан. Энэ бол бидний хувьд бол цоошин асуудал бол байгаагүй. Энэ хяналтын ажлыг хийхэд бидэнд тодорхой хэмжээний мэдээлэл байсан, баримтууд байсан. Энэ ажлыг эхлэхийн тулд бид өмнө хэлсэн хуулийн байгууллагын ажилтнуудтай уулзахаас гадна бид хэвлэл мэдээллийнхэнтэй бол бас энэ сэдвэр бол нэлээд нэгт хамтарч ажиллаж байсан. Төрийн бус байгууллагуудтай бас нэлээд олон мэдээлэл солилцож мөн одоо хамтарсан үйл ажиллагаанд явуулж байсан. Хүний эрхийн чиглэлээр үйл ажиллагаа явуулдаг судлаачид эрдэмтдтэй бас санал бодлоо солилцож байсан. Энэ бүхэн дээрээ түшиглээд хяналтын ажлын энэ төлөвлөгөө нөгөө юу гаргасан. Юу гэдэг вэ? Хөтөлбөрийг гаргасан. Энэ үйл ажиллагаа эхлэхэд бид хэвлэл мэдээлэлээр бол өргөн сурталчилсан. Хэвлэлийн баг хурал зохион байгуулж байсан. Энэ үйл ажиллагаа комисс эхлэх гэж байна. Энэ үйл ажиллагааны хүрээнд ийм асуудлыг судалнаа. Ийм газруудаар явнаа. Ингэж ажилланаа гэж. За үүнийгээ бид телевизээр явуулсан. Хэвлэлийн байгууллагынхаа асуудал сонин тавьсан. Хяналтын ажлын хөтөлбөр одоо нөгөө өдөртөмжийг мөн одоо хэвлэл мэдээлэлээр цацсан олон нийтэд. Комиссийн тухай хуулинд зааснаар бол комисс бол нотлох баримт аливаа асуудлын талаар нотлох баримт цуглуулах, шалгаж байгаа асуудлын талаар албан тушааландаас тайлбар авах, гэрч аяг асуух, тодорхойлт гаргуулж авах, шинжээж томилох ийм эрхүүд бол нээлттэй байгаа. Гэрчийн тухайд гэвэл комиссийн хувьд комисс өөрсдөө комиссийн гишүүд ажилтнууд тодорхой асуудлын талаар үзсэн харсан зүйлийн талаар хүмүүстэй уулзаж тодорхойлт авах, тайлбар авах ийм боломж байгаа. Тэр хүмүүсийг комисс бол шүүхэд тодорхой хүний эрх зөрчигдсөн талаар тэр зөрчигдсөн эрхийг хамгаалах талаар нэхэмжил гаргах ийм боломжтой. Төлөөлөл нэхэмжил гаргадаг. Ийм нэхэмжил гаргах эрхийг бол бид бас ашиглаж хэрэгжүүлж байсан. Тэр маань амжилттай шүүх шийдэгчсэн тохиолдлууд бий. Шүүхэд тэр хүмүүсийг гэрч болгоод дуудах ийм одоо боломжтой. Харин нэг зүйл манай хувьд одоо анхаарал дутагдaltaй юу гэвэл комисст мэдүүлэг өгч байгаа гэрч бол хуулийн хариуцлага хүлээх одоо буруу тайлбар өгвөл буруу гэрчлэвэл хуулийн хариуцлага хүлээх тийм заалт бол байдаггүй. Энэ бол зөвхөн шүүхтэр байгаа.
The Human Rights Act gives the Commission power to take cases to court, but in this instance we decided that we wanted the full cooperation of all of the players in a very complex area. So that was the private operators, the bus operators, the regional councils, local government, central government. And so we made a decision to state that this was not intended to make findings that would end up in court. It was intended to explore what changes were required in legislation, policy, practice and funding to provide accessibility, and to look at how best that could be done in the New Zealand context.
Ours is not an adjudicatory body, and in the very nature of things the Human Rights Commission of India only makes recommendations, and those recommendations they are not binding as such, but they have great force, and they are, as I said little earlier, 90 to 95% of the recommendations are implemented. I think I should clarify one more thing here. Although our orders are not enforceable, they are only in the nature of recommendations, yet those recommendations are by and large accepted. The Commission, it is such a high level body selected by high level body, one. Number two, the Commission also, with the experience and the men it has in its commission, holds inquiries reasonably and fairly, giving opportunity to all in an, as I said, the non-adversarial and cooperative type of inquiries. We look into and pass appropriate and reasonable recommendations.